It's a pleasure and honour to interview Jeremy Rodell, who is a well-known name in the world of humanism. He is the current chair of South West London Humanists, is a trustee of Humanists UK. He also has a special interest in opening and developing dialogue with religious organisations to improve mutual understanding and encourage cooperation where there are common interests. And as a result, he has spearheaded Humanists UK's Open Dialogue programme. And he's currently Humanists UK's Dialogue Officer, although he feels that his main job with humanism is actually involved with school speaking, which takes an awful lot of his time and something that he enjoys doing very much. He's also written for Humanistically Speaking, and his excellent article entitled Dialogue, Not Debate is still available to read. Just visit the Humanistically Speaking website and check out November's issue at page 6. But this issue, is about spirituality and humanism. And Jeremy wrote another article way back in Humanist Life magazine in August 2014 about the uncomfortable, for some, use of the term spirituality when we refer to the transcendent experience most of us have had when we are inspired by the arts, by nature, or by the universe, or even science. And that is what this interview is about. So welcome, Jeremy, and thank you very much for joining us.
Nice to see you.
And you. Right. Before we go into spirituality, though, the dialogue program, I know, is very close to your heart. Mm-hmm. And I wondered if you'd like to share with us how you feel the project is going.
I think it's going pretty well, actually. I mean, what we did getting 3 years ago, we agreed a sort of basic strategy of doing something on dialogue. And the core of that was to train up a group of people right across the country who are humanists interested in engaging in dialogue with religious people, give them sort of some of the tools that they'd find useful and form a network where they could support each other. And that's what we've been doing. Obviously, COVID changed things, so we've been doing it all online. But we've now got well over 100 people in that network and all over the country, and a huge diversity of activities going on. I mean, dialogue is essentially a local activity because it's about contacting local people. So, it varies a lot, but I think that's been going pretty well. And we're running a training program roughly once a quarter now for anyone who's interested in doing it.
Okay, well, let's go on to the spirituality aspect. What does spirituality mean to you, and how do you define this essential element of our humanity?
Well, that's one of the problems, isn't it? That this is a word that I think the philosopher Richard Norman has referred to as slippery. It's slippery, and most humanists don't actually like using it. And I must admit, I also avoid using it if I can. But what I'm concerned about is that we don't either deny that this is an aspect of being human, or feel that we're sort of banned from a whole area of terminology and things which is appropriated then solely by people of religious faith. Mm. So I think that's the sense in which I'm in. So like all terms that are a bit vague, I think it's useful if we do use it, and I say I generally don't, but if you do use it, is to try and define what you mean by when you use it. And to me, it's used in 3 distinct but related ways. One is the way in which anybody who's working in humanist care, the pastoral support staff, working in hospital, for instance, will be familiar with this. It's used in the NHS. It's used, spiritual care is the term that's used. We might not like it, but what it means is the sort of innermost bit of your humanity. It's when people are facing significant things in their lives, and it's addressing their sense of self, when they're thinking about what was the meaning of is the meaning of my life, and so on. These really big questions that people often only can't talk to anybody else about. Mm-hmm. And that's the sense, that innermost sense of your humanity. It's the sense in which it's used in that. So that's one thing. Another thing is the religious sense, which is the sort of sense that I'm having, that you've got a spiritual connection with the deity or some other, what we would refer to as sort of supernatural element. But that's a very powerful thing for a lot of religious people, of course, that they feel they're in dialogue and they with God, and they feel the presence of spiritual presence, and so on. So that's the religious thing, and that experience can be very, very important for people. Now, obviously, we would say all that's coming from inside you. There's nothing out there really, but that isn't to diminish, what people report about it. But obviously, that's not for us. That's not, humanists don't have that. But the other bit, which is the bit I think you referred to earlier on, is what is, I would call, sort of spiritual experience. And that covers a whole spectrum of things. And it goes from, the sense you have listening to a wonderful piece of music when you're sort of uplifted, and seeing a wonderful view, often a surprising view, or you're in nature, you're looking at the stars, or sometimes it can come completely out of the blue. You've got this wonderful experience. And that experience has a few sort of characteristics, and particularly if you're going up towards the sort of peak experience end of it. And one of the characteristics of it is that you lose your sense of self, that there's, instead of there's being you looking at something, there's just the something, and the loss of differentiation between subjects and objects, or a sense of connectedness. This, that's the next level down, if you like, the sense of connectedness with something bigger than you. You're part of the universe, and so on. So those things, I think, are actually very universal, human experiences that we've all had at some times in our lives to greater or lesser extents. And the difference between a humanist or somebody else who's not religious and a religious person having those experiences, that we would say that's a truly wonderful experience, and it's part of being human, having those experiences. But it's nothing to do with some external supernatural reality. That's the difference between us, and then which will go back to the religious thing. So those three, I see those three elements, and it's useful to disentangle those three, I think.
I think you've clarified some important points there. I mean, one of the questions I was going to ask you is what you would say to those who declare that in accepting the term spirituality, we are in fact referring to something that is otherworldly, and even a greater reference to God, and that therefore we're affirming that there is a deity after all. That's the kind of thing that troubles me. But I think you've pretty much answered that. So thanks very much for that.
Yeah. I mean, I should perhaps say, if people want to get into semantics, you've got to be careful with this. Spirit is actually from the word about breath. So it means life force is the sense, really underneath sense to all of this stuff. And it's used in lots of different senses. You see it above the door of a pub. Well, yes, you can get some spirits in there, all right. That's for sure. Exactly. And it's the same room. But you're right that what people worry about is that somehow you'll get contaminated. That if you use this word, it's you're taking on religious garb, and that's why we hesitate to use it. But that's fine. I hesitate to use it for that reason. But is not to say that A, we should be banned from using it, and B, that the senses in which I mean, two of those three senses are ones that we can own. They're part of our humanity, and we shouldn't we shouldn't deny the reality that that's part of being human, and humanists are human.
Yes, you said that spirituality is a term that, or you've indicated that spirituality is a term that religious organizations have kind of hijacked. And you're really saying that we should not accept that spirituality can equally apply to humanists and non-believers and atheists as well.
I mean, we shouldn't deny their right to use it as well, or to use it in the sense that they use it, which is different from ours, but
I mean, I've had conversations with Christians who insist that I'm a Christian because I live my life the way a Christian lives their lives.
Yeah.
I even use the word spiritual, and of course that proves that I'm a Christian, which is rubbish. But it's a frequent sort of argument.
Yeah, it is.
But humanists, I think, do have a bit of a problem with this, because it seems to me that we're trying, as humanists, to reach a point of understanding of ourselves on an emotional rather than an empirical way. And that's why we're having so much difficulty with this. I mean, emotions are by definition personal and individual. And we can talk about an experience, and others may well empathize and even feel that they share the same experience, but they cannot know this. And we humanists instinctively look for empirical evidence, don't we? That really isn't there, or it's hard to get to. We might even declare the whole thing as an illusion of the mind, which you hinted at earlier on. And yet it's real to us. I mean, I think this is an important part of the human condition, but how can humanists really explore this without recourse to empirical science? I mean, through meditation or discussion groups or
no, I think this is a really important point, actually. And if anybody's read anything that Raymond Tallis has written, he's very interested in this. You know, there's subject and there's subjective experiences, and there's objective facts about the world. And obviously science, I would say as humanists, you know, the best way of finding objective facts about the world is to use the scientific method and being willing to change your mind if new evidence comes along, and all of those things we talk about. You know, you can, the world of your subjective experience isn't really the world of science. I mean, the example I use about this is to say, well, you know, you can, I'm sure you could put somebody in a scanner and hit their hand with a hammer, and you can see which bits of their brain light up when you do that, and you could say, well, that's what's going on. It doesn't tell you anything whatsoever about the experience of having your hand hit with a hammer. You know, it doesn't. Same with, you know, anything to do with emotion. You know, that in fact most of our lives, the most important bits of our lives are not us engaged in scientific research or looking at evidence. Most of the important bits of our lives are our subjective experiences. That's what, you know, that's what makes life rich. And as you said, David, correctly, you know, the only way you can communicate those subjective experiences to other people is you can explain them, but that's where, you know, the realm of the arts comes in. You know, a good novelist you read it and say, oh, I felt like that, you know, and you know, Beethoven doesn't really want you to analyze all the tricks and stuff he's using beneath the surface to give you the sense that he's doing with his music, you know, and so that, I think that's quite a separate that's quite a separate thing. And so there's lots of questions science doesn't address, and that's fine, you know, providing we say, well, when we're talking about objective facts about the world, or trying to find objective facts about the world, then science is the best way of doing that, you know.
Yes, I think the problem is that humanists have this inclination to want to look at empirical facts, and sometimes those empirical facts just aren't there, and we have to recognise that. So it seems to me there's an empty space in humanism to accommodate that. I have a feeling that you're trying to work towards that. I mean, how best can spirituality be recognised and absorbed into the humanist philosophy? How can we be spiritual humanists?
Yeah, that's a tricky term, isn't it? Yeah. Like even you saying that, I feel, oh, you know, it's like negative thing, because that's what we all do, you know. Yeah. But and I think we might feel the same about that as when you hear somebody say, well, I'm a Christian humanist, you know, that so I think actually that this is part of growing up as being humanist. You know, up to now there's lots of battles we continue to fight, which is against religious privilege and so on. But I think, you know, as humanism matures, we can stop being defined by what we're opposed to, if you like. You know,
I agree with that.
So there's a big area of overlap with people. In fact, this touches on another, I think, really interesting issue which is coming up, which is slightly tangential to what you're talking about here, which is this question about, you know, values as well. So this is, we're talking about experience and what's part of your humanity. And as humanists, I say, well, you know, that's the thing, you know, your humanity. And this is an important part of your humanity. In fact, you can argue it's the most important part of your humanity. And in those senses, there's no difference between a humanist and a religious person, except sometimes they attribute that aspect of their humanity and those experiences to a religious cause. Often they don't, you know. Somebody says, well, I love my wife, you know, that what they mean is the same as I do when I use the same term. But it also, you get a similar thing with values. And I think that's a really interesting thing that's coming up recently, and there's a very good lecture series Linda Woodhead did last year about this, which is that maybe the big division, if you like, isn't so much between, you know, religion and non-religion. You know, we've got half the people in the country are not religious and so on, but is between basically in small l liberal values, not meaning liberal politically, but the sort of values that generally we would probably say are humanist values, but of course other people say, well, those are just Christian values, or those are, you know, whatever. But these common values, and those that the minority people, but don't share those values, you know, and those where you find that there's going to be sort of more in common between the average humanist and the average, you know, liberal Jew, say, where there's a huge area of commonality, than there is between them and an ultra-Orthodox Jew that wants to have segregated schooling and, you know, all sorts of, has a view of the role of women in society and all sorts of things, which would be anathema to a liberal Jew as they would to a humanist. And that applies in most religions as well, you know. So increasingly, I'm thinking that's the division that it matters. And maybe, and it's much more challenging, we should be seeking dialogue across those divisions as well. But of course, that's much more difficult than what we normally do.
So really, you're not putting a definition separating humanism from religions. You're making a separation between liberalism and orthodoxy. Liberalism in the widest sense. You can be a Christian, liberal, Muslim, or whatever. Yeah,
I think that's becoming, and you've only got to look at the world now, you know. The extreme example, of course, is you know, that Vladimir Putin thinks he is doing the right thing.
Yeah.
Now that's an extreme example, but you know, the guy who yesterday, I think it was, signed in Georgia new legislation which would ban abortion from the moment of conception. You know, he thinks he's doing the right thing.
Yeah. I didn't know about that thing in Georgia, but at the moment, but that seems to me bordering on insanity. But it's just my own point of view. You've referred in the past to experiential spirituality and inner spirituality as distinct from religious spirituality. I mean, I think you've pretty much defined that, haven't you, already?
Those are the three that I mentioned at the beginning.
Okay. It seems to me that if we're going to continue using words like spirituality, we need to decide that spirituality defines what is in ourselves and not what is out there or external to us. But some will always find that term difficult. So if they want to use terms like connectedness or transcendence, that's fine, so long as it's understood to mean the same thing. I mean, I think you've already covered that as well, haven't you? Because you mentioned that.
I think you should use the term you feel comfortable with. But and personally, if I use the word spiritual, I would always say, and by that I mean ... you know. And so words like sense of transcendence and things, you know, I think that's I think personally I prefer to use those terms, but I don't think we should be banned from using the S word.
It would be nice if we can use terms like spirituality without the religious baggage connected to it. I mean, you just said, you know, you need to explain it. When you're talking about spirituality, you're not talking about the religious thing, which you know, lots of people will actually think of. So, I mean, are there any books or or reading matter that you'd like to recommend to those who?
Well, one book about this, which is this one. I don't know if that's coming out correctly.
It's not coming out very well. It's put it right. The Book of Atheist Spirituality. Yeah.
Yeah. Andre Comte Sponville.
Andre Comte Sponville. Yeah.
So he's a French philosopher, and a lot of the book, you read it and you think, well, I disagree with all of this, but then he talks about a particular peak spiritual experience which just happened to him. He's walking with some friends in a wood, when he was
you described this, yes,
20s, yeah.
Right. Yes.
And that's a nice example of one. And there's also a piece which, if you Google, it's in New Humanist. It was a number of years ago by Saif Rahman. Let me just find out how you spell his name. So that's Rahman. Now he's an ex-Muslim, and he did this article called "My Spirituality as a Humanist," and that's also and it's much shorter than reading the book. And I think he puts it extremely well, really. How he sees it as somebody who's. So he's left religion, but he's talking about it in the similar sorts of terms to Comte Sponville, but he's doing it shorter. So.
Right. So this is Asif Rahman, My Spirituality. Is that what you said?
It's called My Spirituality as a Humanist, and it's in New Humanist. So if you go onto New Humanist site, you can search in their archive and you'll find it.
Okay. Is there? Well, thank you very much for that, Jeremy. I thought that was very interesting, and I've got a feeling we could have perhaps gone into a bit more detail about about what we mean about spirituality. You opened my mind to a lot of things I didn't expect. Is there anything you'd like to say at this point? Any points that I've missed that you'd like to raise?
I don't think so. I think we talked about the subjective versus objective thing. I think is a really important thing to bear in mind on this. And one other little thing which I thought is quite a sort of challenge in a way in pushing us along this is how Einstein, not a humanist, but certainly not a particularly religious man either. People said he may have been a deist, but anyway, there's a quote from him which he says, actually not having a sense of connectedness with the rest of the universe is actually, that's the problem. It's not the other way around. So he says this, as a human being is part of a whole called by us the universe, a part limited in time and space. He experiences himself, herself, we would say, his thoughts and feelings as separate from the rest. It's a kind of optical delusion of his consciousness. This delusion is a kind of prison for us, restricting us to our personal desires and to the affection for those nearest to us. So you get what he's saying is that it's, instead of this being a sort of exceptional thing, this was actually, if you're being realistic, that sense of connectedness should be there all the time. It's just that we don't often have it. We don't often experience it because we're so wrapped up in ourselves. And that's quite a sort of, that's quite a challenging thing. And it's a useful mental bit of exercise to sort of stretch the muscle, I think.
It's a strange thing, this consciousness, isn't it? It's, I mean, there's been a lot of scientific work that's gone into where we get this sense of self, where we get this sense of being apart from nature. And of course, it's an essential element if we want to survive. I can see that, you want to live, you want to thrive, and all the rest of it. So you need to see yourself as an individual, but it's a very subtle and complex thing, and to this day nobody really knows where it lies.
No, and there's some very interesting stuff going on, in quantum theory about this, because people are, they're saying, well, things only exist in a particular form because they're perceived, and therefore you need consciousness, and where does this, is the universe diffused with, suffused with consciousness, and do rocks have consciousness? personally, I don't buy that at all. But they're trying to.
Are you really there, or just a figment of my imagination?
What they're doing is trying to say, well, wait a minute. If you need consciousness to make the world real, how does that happen? And is it there everywhere, even when there aren't any people? And so I'm sure they haven't found an answer to that. But it is, the whole consciousness thing is a huge riddle. But all we can do is say, okay, we haven't solved that, but we know it's there. We can experience it. And these sense of ourselves and the sense of, sometimes the sense of connectedness and feeling part of a wider, these are just part of our humanity. And this is the essence of being human. And I think as humanists, that's something we should treasure.
Well, I think it ends with a fascinating thought, Jeremy, and thank you so much for that. And thank you very much for giving us your time.
You're welcome. It's nice to talk to you, David, as always.
And for you, because I feel I know you quite well anyway. We had quite a lot to do with each other. So I'm going to finish now to everyone, but just by giving a quote that Jeremy left in his article about spirituality and humanism in Humanist Life magazine, which was published in August 2014. And I think it's very, very thought-provoking and interesting. It goes like this, if I can get it up on screen. Humanists may prefer not to use the S word if there's another way of conveying what we mean. Maybe aesthetic awareness, sense of transcendence, love of nature, or simply love. On the other hand, we shouldn't let the baggage of religious spirituality put us off if it's the best word available, or if we need to reclaim it from those who seek to exclude the non-religious. Whatever terms we use, spiritual experience and awareness of our own and others' profound inner lives are important parts of what it means to be human and as a humanist. And while this will remain an area of difference between humanists and the religious, we can also recognize it as an important area of common ground, which I think is where Jeremy is coming from. So thanks very much. Bye-bye.
Humanistically Speaking is a volunteer-run online publication slotting in the gap between National Humanist glossy magazines and Humanist UK's newsletter. We aim to create a platform that can bring humanist groups and individual humanists together, of course, but also to allow non-humanists to join in the debate. We want to explore topics of interest that any freethinker will be concerned about and offer informative, factual articles that encourage people to reflect upon, explore, question, and share ideas. We are in an exciting marketplace of ideas, and it is important that humanists from all stables of opinion have a voice. Humanistically Speaking is unique in offering this. Our remit is constantly developing, and by the start of our second year, we grew from a bi-monthly to a regular monthly issue. We've also expanded from email communication only to launching our own website and created our first values publication, From Atheism to Humanism. All of this has been made possible through your donations and your goodwill, and we're deeply grateful to those supporters among you who have donated already. But this is just the beginning. Our aim is a bold one. In addition to offering our support to National Secular Society and Humanists UK's campaign objectives, we want to share the humanist idea with everyone in society. Naturally, we want to celebrate rational thinking, open inquiry, compassion, fairness and justice, but we want to balance these good things with enjoyment and having fun, a sense of comradeship, and the thrill of just being alive. But to go further, we need financial security. and we're asking you to help us. If you approve of what we're doing, please join us on our journey towards the foundation of a national humanist magazine that lends voice to every rational and respectful opinion. We want to explain and celebrate what humanism is and share humanist ideas that we believe can do so much to improve the way we all live. You can help us to achieve these aims by setting up a standing order of £4 a month or whatever you can afford to Humanistically Speaking, or if you're not able to do that, think about giving us a kickstart boost by donating a one-off lump sum of perhaps £20. Our bank details are at the bottom of this screen, but if you prefer, please click on the link below that will take you straight to the appropriate place on our Humanistically Speaking website and follow the guidance given. Every donation will be acknowledged with a message of thanks from us. One last thing before you go, do spread the word with your friends, because Humanistically Speaking is there for everyone. There are also many potential humanists out there who already share our values and yet don't know we exist. There are also humanists who don't have a group nearby and who might be feeling like a lone voice in their communities. We would like to serve them also and play our part in breaking down any sense of isolation. We're doing all we can by committing our time and energy. Please help us with your goodwill and donations and join us on this journey. Thank you.